Dearest Indian friends, greetings from Bell'Italia 88 and welcome back. I am Caterina Brazzi Castracane, I am an historian, and today in collaboration with the Italian Culture Center in New Delhi, I will get you in a virtual tour through the history, visiting some of the most important monuments of our city, Rome. Just give me some second to share with you my screen, and we start with our webinar that today is dedicated to the ages of Rome. Our starting point is basically related with the history of Rome. And even if it is quite difficult to imagine, the history of our city started as the history of a small village placed in the central part of Italy, in that region that was called by Latins Latium. According to legend, Rome was built by twin sons Romulus and Remo over 7 hills on the left bank of Tiber, and quickly became a huge capital with a role of first importance in the history of Europe. For this reason, we can talk about the history of Rome, and we can separate it in different phases. The first one just related with the founding in 753. The second one, that is the period of the Roman Republic, that is here represented by this acronym SPQR, that just means that the power at that time was managed by both Senate and people. The third period is the period of the empire, from Julius Caesar to Tarquin the Superb, the last emperor. And the third is related with the history of Rome as the capital of the Christianity. Is the history of papacy, and is the history that is related to that moment when the Pope was also the king of Rome. The last one is the moment that started at the end of 1870, when Rome became the secular capital of Italy. And now Rome is a sort of museum that we can call city, with all the great ruins of our past, but also the problematics and difficulties of a modern capital. We will see it in our tour that will start from the Pantheon, and we will have a perfect view of what means a long period of transformation, because this area that was related with 3 different parts of the city in the Roman age, the part of Campus Marzio, the field dedicated to the god Mars, and the part called Quartier Colonna and Quartier Pigna, this part of the city was the really heart of Rome. And during the next century, this is the part of the city that was more transformed in the sign of the different period of our history. We have to start with the Pantheon. That is one monument that is an example of the several lives that our buildings could have in the history. I mean, the Pantheon was realized to be the temple dedicated to all gods. The name Pantheon just means in Old Greek all gods. And during the 7th century was transformed into one of the most important church in Rome, la chiesa di Santa Maria ad Martires. Today, the Pantheon is maybe the most important building of our central part of the city. It rises in Piazza della Rotonda. Rotonda is just another name of the Pantheon, and in front of it you can find still today an important fountain designed by Giacomo della Porta in 1575 that is still surmounted by an obelisk. And in this obelisk you can find hieroglyphs that are still visible because the obelisk belonged to the temple of Isis. This building was created during the first consulate of Agrippa in 27 BC to commemorate the victory over Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. In the next years was damaged several times, and this is the reason why this fountain is not the original one, but is a second building realized for the volunteer of the Emperor Adrian, who decided to rebuild the first temple in honor of Agrippa. On the pediment of the pronaos, you can also see the dedicatory inscription that was set up by Adrian. That means Marcus Agrippa Lucius Filius cos tertium fecit. I mean, Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, during the third period of consulate, fecit, realized this building. After Constantine, the Pantheon was abandoned, and just in the first part of the 7th century was consecrated as a church and dedicated to the Virgin Mary. During the next centuries, the Pantheon was object of different planes of transformation. Maybe the most important of them was commissioned to Gian Lorenzo Bernini to create a two-tower bell that you can see in front of you to transform the ancient building in something modern. The bell towers would be removed at the end of 19th century, but what I would like you be able to notice is that is a sort of representation of the mentality of the modern age, when it was possible to think, to reuse and to transform all the different building from the ancient time in something new, in something modern. The architectural scheme of the Pantheon remains the same of the original one, and is basically design around two places, the Rotonda and the Promenade. The promenade is the entering part of the temple, and is designed around six different monolithic Corinthian columns that create three aisles to put together the part of the rotonda and the outside part of the promenade. The most important aisle is the central one that leads the columns to the bronze door to enter inside the rotonda. And the delighted fact that you can feel and see when you are entering inside the Pantheon is not visible from outside, because it's related with a peculiar play of dark and light generated from this central open oculus that measures 9 meters across. The idea was to realize something that was designed to be a perfect geometrical representation of the power of light. And this is more visible if you think that in a peculiar part of the years, the Romans used the open oculus to create amazing light performance that were able to celebrate the emperor, also his divine power. The oculus is a sort of stargate, and it is be able to link the sky and the earth, creating a sort of magic kind of reality inside the building. Another important aspect, maybe the most important, is that the dome vault is a sort of a perfect representation of another kind of reality, with the perfect form of a globe inscribed inside the building. And this is something that is simply to understand, just looking this kind of imaging, to realize that there is something that could link the possibility to see the sky and the universe, and to transport their knowledge inside the another kind of realization. And this is more remarkable if you think that was created during the first century AD. Now, and let me put my image in so you can see the part of the text. Now the Pantheon is the temple of memory. Even because the artist Raffaello Sanzio chose to be buried inside the Pantheon after his death in 1520. After him, a lot of his contemporary artists decided for the same destiny, but also today you can find inside the Pantheon the tomb of the two first king of Italy and also of the first queen, la Regina Margherita di Savoia. This area is, as I was saying before, an area that represents an urbanistic long period transformation. In this map, you can see that during the 3rd century AD, this part of the city was called the Campus Martio, as I was saying, the field dedicated to the god Mars. But if you see another map, you can understand that the same area during the next century was transformed in the project of a city full of important buildings and church. And every new palace and church was rebuilt by using the stones and the rocks of the ancient monuments. This is more evident in the second square that we could discover, that is called Piazza di Pietra, the square of rocks, because of the stone of the temple dedicated to the Emperor Hadrian that was reused to create this lightful square. The temple was one important building of that period. It was consecrated in 145 by Antonino Pio, who was the Emperor Hadrian's adopted son and also his successor. And in this image, you can see that the temple partially remains as a conversion into a modern building. Actually, of the original temple, you can see 11 columns with Corinthian capitals, and you can recognize the Corinthian style because of the acanthus leaves. You can still see part of the original wall, and under the space you can imagine that there is a part of the sacred room where only the emperor could enter. This temple was dedicated to Hadrian because he was the emperor who was able to defend Italy against the barbarian population that wanted to invade Italy, and also was a traveler, someone who was able to defend the empire, knowing and founding different provinces all around the empire. This is the reason why the facade of the temple should be covered with some different panels related with the provinces and the idea of a complex system that the empire should be. The archaeologists found nearby the temple 24 different panels that are now housed in the Musei Capitolini that are related with the representation of the provinces. As you can see, any panel is designed with peculiar details, and each figure is dressed with in a particular way according with the part of the word that they represent. During the 17th century, another architect, Carlo Fontana, decided to transform the temple into something modern, in a custom house, reusing the columns, the facade and the prono to create a peculiar effect of a building with two life, something related with the past and something related with modernity. And this is the imaging that you can still find if you go to Piazza di Pietra still now. Some years later, on the backside of this palace, another architect, Filippo Raguzzini, realized lively and peaceful Rococo square, just playing with geometrical aspect, light aspect, and something similar to theatrical game. I mean, the piazza that is called Piazza Sant'Ignazio was created to be a sort of stage where the line of the carving facade, the window, and the street could play together to create one space suspended between reality and dream. This square that is named after the huge church dedicated to Sant'Ignazio, and that is still now the Church of the Company of Jesus, is more remarkable if you see that despite of this huge facade, inside the church there is a secret that speaks language of illusion. What I'm trying to say to you is that inside the church there is the great masterpiece of the Jesuit artist Andrea Pozzo. Pozzo was the great interpreter of this technique called quadratura, just technique that could create architectural elements on the walls and on the ceiling of the church, just with line, with color, and with peculiar kind of design. This masterpiece is a sort of amazing trompe-l'œil that is visible in the central part of the nave on the ceiling, and also in seeing the dome. But the most remarkable aspect is that the dome in reality doesn't exist. Pozzo provide it in a canvas of 70 meters in diameter because the dome before was never built because of lack of funds. And so what you are seeing is just a huge painting posed on the ceiling of the church. This is an illusionistic effect, and what you can see and what you can feel is that in this case art is be able to give us some sense of magic and something that by a lot of people it could be seen as an interpretation of the divine power. What you are understanding step by step is that the history of Rome is the history of more cities put together. And maybe we can talk about two different life that are put together and that we can discover just seeing the monuments. The first life is the contemporanean life of Rome that is visible and is a sort of practical point of view over the city. But the second one is a sort of another one, is a sort of representation of the city of the past, something that is hidden under the ground or inside the wall, that is visible just discovering the history of the monument of or of that part of the city. This is still visible in the third square that we are meeting today. That is called Piazza Colonna, as you can imagine, because of the majestic column that is still today posed in the center of the square. Piazza Colonna was considered for centuries the center of the city, and the column was dedicated to another emperor, Marco Aurelio, and is called Colonna Antonina or Colonna of Marco Aurelio. Is a great masterpiece of marble. It composed of 27 different blocks of marble. Inside there is a step to go to the summit, and his height is 42 meters. With other two columns, the Colonna Traiana, the column dedicated to the Emperor Trajan, the column dedicated to the Virgin Mary in front of St. Mary Major, is the third important column of our history. As I was saying, is dedicated to the philosopher emperor, the man who be able to delay the barbarian invasion of Italy for all the period of his government, and the man that is in this image represented in front of the Capitoline Hill, the palace of the government of the city of Rome. His column was inspired by the column of Traians that still now is visible nearby Piazza Venezia, and that was erected to celebrate the victory of the Emperor Trajan over the Dacians. As you can see, all the parts of the column are decorated with a peculiar system of relief. In each part you can find details related with soldiers, horses, navies, cities, with a sort of huge representation of the power of Rome. The same point of view is visible in the other part of the column, where you can see also the part of the village in the lower part of the column that Romans decided to found in the different part of the empire that they decide to transform in provinces of Rome. The summit is now crowned with a huge statue of St. Paul, as the summit of the Trajan's column is crowned with a statue of St. Peter. St. Peter and St. Paul are the main important saints of the city of Rome, and the statue was posed in that place where originally was posed the figures of Marco Aurelio and his wife Faustina. Piazza Colonna remained the center of Rome during the modern age. And this is one of the reasons why the Chigi family, a family of bankers from Siena in Tuscany, a small and wonderful city in Tuscany, decided to acquire in 1659 an old palace that was property of the Aldobrandini family. Since the moment when one member of that family was elected Pope with the name of Alexander VII in 1655, the palace is known as Palazzo Chigi, and his history history was so important for and linked with the history of Rome that in 1961 was decided that the palace was the right palace to post and create inside it the house of the Italian government. The square and the palace still remained it during the last part of our history, the heart of the city. And this is visible also if you can see and imagine the street near Piazza Colonna. As you can see in this imaging, this is the corner of Palazzo Chigi, and this street is named Via del Corso. In this imaging is always Via del Corso in another part of this street that is that leads Piazza Venezia with Piazza del Popolo, a sort of street that is considered a great boulevard. During the first part of the history of Rome as a capital, Rome was object of a huge urbanistic transformation that was thought to give Rome the right rule and composition of a modern capital. Via del Corso became in this way a sort of great street of representation, and on both sides of the street, several architects decide to create a modern kind of building. One of the most important of them is the palace that you can see on the right side of this street, that is related with this name that you can see on the top of the building, La Rinascente. La Rinascente was the first department store that was realized in Italy. And the department store is something that was able to create a revolution in the way of life in that period that we can imagine posed between the end of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century. The architect was Giuliano De Angelis, and this building still remains the imaging of one of the most important dress store in Rome. It was completely restored 2 years ago, and is still dedicated to the celebration of a shop as a shrine. By the design of the same architect, nearby the Rinascente Palace, we find a sort of pedonal gallery that was realized in the first part of the 20th century. This imaging is something that could let us understand which was the peculiarities of that architectural style that was used in that period. It's a style that we call call in Italy Stile Liberty, but you can also find it named in different forms. When you speak about England, you can find the style related with art and craft. If you speak about Spain, you can talk about modernism, and if you are thinking to the France, you can think to the style that we call Art Nouveau. Different names for one particular kind of style that was basically concentrated and posed by using just industrial materials as glass, iron cast and bricks. The most important example in the European architecture was the huge crystal palace that was realized in London for the Universal Exhibition in 1851, and that was just a place where the protagonist of the architectural view was just the light and the power of that century. This is noticed also in another gallery that is important for our city, because it is a pedonal gallery realized in the first part of the 20th century, but was restored 15 years ago and dedicated to the important actor Alberto Sordi, one protagonist of the Italian cinema. The gallery is still now a sort of great shopping center where you can find the form of the architect of the past, columns, festoons, and different kind of decoration that that are remarkable because are huge and full of energy from the past. But this space is now dedicated to house, a coffee house, and different kind of shops. So you can feel that there is a special link between the past and the future put together in the present time. And now, this is a good question. Rome is a city in development, and the present time is a complex time when and where the question is how to preserve the past, but also how to create something new. And sometimes the contemporary art and architecture are difficult to understand or to put near the past. But there are some examples of other possibilities that are maybe the answer for our future. An example of this new point of view is represented of the last opening in Piazza Venezia, Palazzo Bonaparte. As you have understand, seeing the name Bonaparte, the palace was property of Napoleon's mother, Letizia Ramolino. who used to live there since 1836. Inside the palace, there is this huge statue of Napoleon as the god Mars that was realized by Antonio Canova. And all the ancient apartment that was restored last year is now dedicated to be a huge and important exhibition space. This means that there is a possibility to put together the past and the future. And the possibility is something that could preserve our memories, but also could be something alive for us, for the contemporaries, for the person that could enjoy Rome, discovering this sort of city basically transformed in a sort of stage for history. And for the same reason, I want to say goodbye to you with this frame that I have taken from the film Vacanze Romane with the great stars Audrey Hepburn and Gregory Peck, that in the moment that is represented are discovering Rome in Vespa, one of the icons of the 20th century. And I hope that we will discover some other part of our city, maybe in other virtual tour, but maybe in the future, visiting our eternal city by Vespa, as the cinema teached us that is possible to do. So I want to thank you, and I stop to share my video to say goodbye to you, and thank you to you, and thank you for this virtual experience, and I hope we will see again in this kind of conference, but maybe, as I was saying, in Rome or in other cities in the next future. Bye bye, and thank you. See you the next time.